class. I hope you're doing well. As I'm sure most of you know, your papers are due next week, and so too are your presentations. So obviously, with everything going on, we are not going to be in class together for you to give these presentations. So I had told you that I was going to change it up just a little bit to work according to social distancing. So the two options that you are going to have are basically, they were already sort of ingrained in the prompt that we were originally going to do. The one option that you don't necessarily have is to like just speak in front of the class, right? But you have two other options that I believe both were listed on there, if memory serves. One is that you can do a video, sort of like an explainer style video, that presents your research findings, or you can do a PowerPoint presentation, but you need to be able to add dictation or your commentary to your slides. So that way when we play it as a slideshow, or when I play it as a slideshow, I'll be able to hear you dictate what's on your slide / explaining what you need to explain about your project. So I wanted to go over a few best practices for this. Let me start by saying though, before I go into some of those best practices, I am going to add a video that sort of explains how to do PowerPoint with the dictation. It's not going to be a video that I've created. I'm gonna find one, or it's going to be from YouTube, from someone else. But this will be something that you can use to follow along if you want to do the PowerPoint version of this. For those of you who would like to do a video, I'll try and find a couple of videos that might explain how to utilize some of the more common film editing softwares. So like if you have iMovie or something, something similar to that you can do some video editing on. I realize that for some of you, video editing is going to be kind of really out of your realm, and that's okay. You still have the PowerPoint option, which for most people, PowerPoint is a fairly safe bet that they've worked with it before, or at the very least, you've worked with word processing programs like Microsoft Word or Google Docs or Google Slides, or, something similar to PowerPoint. For a lot of you, that might be easier, and that's fine. So those are your two options, right? So either video or PowerPoint that also includes your commentary. Now, obviously, if you do a video, you should be adding some sort of voiceover probably to get your point across there as well. So either way, it should have your voice explaining the results and conclusions and whatnot of your research. The time limits and things like that, you can look to the prompt for that. Those have not changed. It's just going to be that those are the two methods that are available to you to do the presentation, okay? So with that being said, obviously both of these options have visual components to them and auditory components to them. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about those two things. So let's talk about the auditory stuff first. Obviously you should be speaking to me, / your classmates and audience, either through PowerPoint dictation or through a commentary on your video if you choose that option. What should be contained in that? So a couple of things. You're going to want to give a very brief overview of what your project was and what you were looking for in your research project. Beyond that, you won't want to focus so much on, like, say, your literature review. You might pay a little lip service to your methodology, just so your classmates / audience know how you went about doing your research, particularly if you had primary research involved. But then after that, you're going to want to focus primarily on your results, perhaps a little bit of a discussion and conclusion. So you're going to sort of summarize those pieces of your paper to present to your audience in your presentation form, okay? So the other thing about the audio, if you're doing a video in particular, sometimes people like to add like background music or, you know, like a soundtrack or sound effects, depending on how they're sort of putting together and what kind of flavor of video they're doing. And those are fine, but make sure that the sounds in your video, so like background music or like sound effects or things like that, don't detract from what you are saying to your audience. Okay, so make sure it adds to the video, but doesn't take away from your audience's ability to understand what you are saying and the message that you are trying to get across to them about your research. Okay. Let's see. So the other thing is that make sure you try and speak clearly as you're recording into your computer or your phone's microphone. Make sure that make sure you're dictating your words in ways that are easy to understand. Try not to mumble. Try to make sure that the volume when you play your video back to you or your PowerPoint back to you, make sure that it's easy to hear. Not only when you have headphones on, but also if you take your headphones out and just like play it on your computer or play it on your phone or wherever you're doing your editing of the PowerPoint or video, that it's easy to hear what you have to say. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about then are the visuals. So visuals can come in many forms. So regardless of if you're doing a video or PowerPoint, there are several things that you'll want to keep in mind. There are also a couple of things that are going to be like specific to one or the other. So let's go through a few of them. If you're going to have text on a slide for a PowerPoint or, as a slide or a frame or something in your video, make sure that the font is easy to read. So don't use like really swoopy, scripty sorts of fonts. For some people, those can be very difficult to sort of figure out what it says. So you want it to be pretty easy to read at a quick glance, right? Because some of your slides aren't going to be up for a super long time. Some of those clips in a video, if you take that option, are not going to be on the screen for a very long time. So you don't want your audience members to be sort of puzzling over what your thing says. So you're going to want to make sure that you're, using fairly easy to read fonts. Another thing about this is there are two kinds of fonts. There are serif and sans serif fonts. I'm going to put up a serif font here. Now you'll notice a serif font, I'm going to try and edit it in here somewhere, has like these little bitties down at the bottoms or sort of as like on the tops, and sans serif does not have those things. So here is an example of a sans serif font, and I'll try and put them up here next to each other so that you can see the comparison of a serif versus a sans serif font. For me, I personally think it's a little easier to read a sans serif font. There are some people who disagree with that, who think it's the other way around. You can take from that what you will. It's not like I'm going to ding you if you use a serif font when I think sans serif is easier to read. But, as long as it's an easy to read font, not like a scripty, crazy, fancy font that's real loopy and swoopy and like whatever, you're probably going to be okay. The other thing is you're probably going to want to make sure that you use minimal text. Nothing pains me more than when you go to a presentation or something like that and they put up, say, a PowerPoint slide, or even if it's a video and it's like just text everywhere. Especially for a PowerPoint slide or something. If it's something that you're going to say out loud, you don't need to give like the entire paragraph you're about to say onto the slide. Leave it to minimal bullet points, right? Keep it, just keep it minimal. Keep it short and sweet and to the point on your slides, right? You can explain yourself in the auditory pieces of this, right? Another thing about fonts, make sure that the font, whenever you're typing something, make sure it stands out against the background. So if you have a really light background, right? So like if it's a white background, you're gonna wanna make sure you use a dark text, like a black or a navy blue or a deep purple, right? You're not going to want to use something like a yellow or a baby pink or a baby blue, right? Because against a white, that's going to be very hard to read. And the same is true in the opposite direction. If you have a very dark background, like a black or a navy blue, that's when you're going to want to use like a light blue or a white or something like that. So something that contrasts really easily with the background, okay? Also, if you have slides that have like pictures and, you know, some text or like whatever, or a frame or a clip in your video that does the same thing, you're going to want to make sure that you create a meaningful path for your audience's eyeballs, right? So if there's just like stuff everywhere, I almost said a bad word. If there's stuff everywhere, and it's hard for me to determine where my eyes should start and stop, your message sometimes can become a little bit discombobulated, right? So it's probably a good idea to sort of make sure that you keep everything in a certain order to where it's easy for my eyes to understand where to start and where I'm supposed to end up, okay? I'm gonna try and go over this a little bit more momentarily. So what I'd like to do with the rest of this video lecture is to basically do a fun roast of, of some posters and flyers and things like that that I find on the internet. And, you know, so I'm going to point out what I like about them. I'm going to point out what I don't like about them and why I don't like them. And a lot of it's going to come back to the things that we've talked about here about, you know, the visuals needing to be clear and easy to read and focused and sort of clean. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn to my own screen and then sort of narrate over the rest of the video as I show you some posters and things. And we're gonna just talk about how good or bad they are and why. So here's our first example. First of all, let me just say there are so many words all over this. I don't even know where to focus my eyes. There are also several different fonts used, lots of different colors. So it's like it draws the eye in the sense that it's colorful, but there are just so many different fonts and messaging just all over the place. And I'm not really sure where I'm supposed to put my eyes or focus my attention. So this would be not a very great poster. So our next example is a sort of, I don't know, some kind of like an inspo quote post that you might see on something like Instagram or other social media. But you'll notice here that the quote that is displayed, the good thing about bad taste is that you don't know you have it. Well, the bad thing about this post is that I basically don't even know that that last part of the quote is there, because that you don't know you have it section of the quote is so close in color to the background that's very, very, very hard to read. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't do that. Where it says good, for example, that good is in white and it really stands out against the dark background. The black is okay with this like really deep pink background, but it's not great. The white definitely stands out a bit better. So this is an example of a bad PowerPoint slide. Now there's several things wrong with this. First and foremost, it is very hard to read because you have white text over this quasi-light background, and so this background image is really taking away from the text that someone is meant to read, presumably. So that's something that you'll want to keep in mind. I would avoid background images behind text, especially on like a PowerPoint slide, or if you have a clip that you're going to have text on for if you're doing a video. The secondary concern with this particular slide is there's just way too much text. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points, and each of those is a sentence or two long, or very long sentences if they're just one. So what you'll want to do is make sure you keep your bullet points on each slide to a minimum. I would say that you could probably have 5 or 6 bullet points on a slide, but only if they're very, very quick to read. So like only a few each. If you have a little bit more that you want to say for each of your bullet points, I would keep it to a minimum of 2 to 3 per slide. And I definitely would keep your sentences short, or your blurbs very short. Some of these, even if if this slide only had 3 or 4, 2 to 3, 3 or 4 bullet points on it, each of the sentences or quasi short paragraphs that are going on here are still too long. So make sure that you, like I said, keep it succinct in terms of the kind of text that you, or the amount of text rather, that you put onto a PowerPoint slide or on any clip for your video that, or for a video that might need to be read. So here's another example of a bad PowerPoint slide. Now for this one, the background isn't so bad. It doesn't necessarily take away from the text. It's the size of the text here that I'm the most worried about. Like where it says the US wireless market Q2 2010 update and the executive summary, that's not so bad. It's not so hard to read, even if it's kind of small on my screen here. But when you get into those big bulky pieces of text with the smaller font, that font is really small. You have to understand that some people are going to be watching this perhaps on their phones or their tablets, although it might be projected somewhere if you're giving a live PowerPoint presentation. Of course, you're not for this class, but you might do that sometime throughout your college career and beyond. It's hard to read that. Even if it's blown up on a projector or something like that, that font, even from a little bit far away, it's going to be too small for people to actually read it. So arguably that was a little bit of an issue in the last slide that we looked at too, but the font was at least a little bit bigger than it is here. So the size of your font in comparison to how big this might be or whatnot, so that proportionality is important. So here, the font with it, like everything after where it says executive summary, it's just too small. So I would say the minimum size font you'd want is sort of like where it says executive summary. That's probably about the smallest proportional to the size of the slide that you'll want to go. Getting too tiny makes it way, 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 way too hard for people to read. Here's another example of a PowerPoint slide. Now this one I like quite a bit, actually. It's very clean. It's not very busy. The sort of header where it says create together makes, it's nice and big and I can see it. The little symbols that they have are sort of minimalistic. It doesn't take too much away from the messaging. And the symbols that are there do have something to do with the blurb themselves. My one critique of this is that the little blurbs underneath each of the symbols, the font could maybe be just a little bit bigger. But other than that, this is very clean. It's for the most part easy to read, with the exception of my one little critique that the font underneath the symbols might be better off if it was a little bit larger than it already is. So this is going to be our last slide that we look at. Granted, there's probably a lot more we could go over, but I just wanted to give you a few examples